Hello, and welcome to this episode of Manufacturing Matters, where we discuss the technologies and trends that are shaping the global manufacturing industry. I'm here today with my colleague, Dan McCarthy,
Hello.
and we have the pleasure of talking today with Ken VonderHaar, who's Director of Client Engagement at CRB. So welcome, Ken. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, before we dive too much into this conversation, can you just take a moment to tell us about CRB?
So CRB is a leading provider of engineering, architecture, and construction and consulting solutions. And we focus primarily on global life sciences and food and beverage industries. We are a company of roughly 1,200 employees with 21 offices across the United States, Canada, and Europe. And we provide turnkey solutions for projects ranging from a new greenfield plant, if you want to build a new greenfield plant, or small routine upgrades, which is predominantly where we spend most of our time. So CRB is a privately held company, and we have kind of a rich history of serving these types of clients throughout the world. And our goal is to consistently strive for the highest standards of technical knowledge, in creativity and execution, and of course meet the client's needs there.
Okay, great. So, i- our main topic today is we really want to talk about your latest Horizons report, which is on operational readiness, and we're going to get into that. But I also want people to understand kind of what your Horizons reports are. They come out somewhat regularly, I think, and on various topics like food and beverage and life sciences. And so, tell us about what those are, what you're trying to achieve with those reports.
So our Horizons reports is an area where we feel we could spend some of our investment dollars in marketing, and so we issue an annual Horizons report both for our life sciences division of the company and our food and beverage division of the company. Now, of course, I'm on the food and beverage side, and really what we try to do with these Horizons reports is as an architectural engineering, construction, and consulting provider, we have a wide variety of clients, and we have the opportunity to see some of the trends that are in the industry, and primarily the ones that are most concerning or most affecting the industry. So we see common challenges with these various different clients and when we see that, quite frankly, we want to investigate it further and really see what are the problems that the client is seeing, what are some of the solutions that are out there, what are some of the best practices that are out there. So we develop a survey with strategic questions, and we try to poll the industry, and in this case our consumer packaged goods folks, and then we review the results and kind of publish them to really get an understanding of what are the challenges that they face internal to their companies, and kind of bring fresh insights into how can we solve some of these things. In the past, on the food and beverage side, in the last couple of years, we have done surveys such as Industry 4.0, which is really all around automation and controls. That was last year's. We've done for alternative proteins and things like that.
Hmm.
This year, what we saw is a problem, a kind of a common problem in the industry where plants were not starting up their projects on time and maybe not meeting their startup and ramp up volumes, and we wanted to do a little deeper dive into that.
So on that note, just thought your latest one is on operational readiness. Maybe define our terms a little bit before we kick that off and go a little deeper into
Yeah.
why it's
It,
so
it,
important.
it's interesting. Operational readiness, as we're kind of trying to define it here, is really what we're calling the pinnacle of getting product to the consumer faster. Okay, missing an in-service date or not meeting the ramp-up curves can really have a large impact to the project and the product success, and quite frankly, to the business objective of the investment there. So, for operational readiness, we kind of look at this as all the things that it takes to get ready to get through construction, and then, of course, the commissioning process and additional activities outside of a machine focused activity, primarily involving other departments within the plant teams, to achieve kind of an overall high OEE, or overall equipment effectiveness,
Mhm.
and really generate the output that you want. So in our operational readiness, we kind of, what I kind of focus on the four M's, and kind of it's minds, machine, material, and method. And we really spend a lot of time focusing on machines, and this operational readiness is really to try to identify to clients and understand their best practices around what do we do with the other types of aspects to make sure the project is successful there.
Okay. And for the survey, you CRB interviewed or surveyed almost 400 consumer packaged goods manufacturers in the U.S. Is that correct? And
Yeah, that's correct. Let me share a slide with you here.
yeah, I'd be curious to know what specifically the questions were, and we're trying to find out from them.
All right, you can see my slides.
Hmm.
Yes.
Great. So we sent the survey out and have received nearly 400 responses from various different consumer packaged goods industries. So this is more than just the food and beverage sector, but we believe that all of these sectors really kind of have the same series of problems here. And you can see on some of the firmographics results that we have here, some of the companies are at pilot scale, like 12% are at pilot scale, so they're just starting out. 88% are really at commercial scale, which you can see about a quarter of them are regional, half of them are national, and almost 20% have a global distribution system. So really we were able to pull from a wide variety of different types of owners to try to get a sense for what kind of results are they having, what kind of investment are they having, and are they essentially successful at their business objective of the project. You can also see here that we have a pretty wide distribution between companies from annual revenue. About half the companies have sales of $50 million or less, and you can see it includes going up to large companies, which was $500 million or more. And then as far as the survey respondents, you can see here that we had everybody from engineering teams, which is kind of what we expected the primary respondent to be, the engineering teams respondent, but also CEOs and general managers and other senior leadership team positions, as well as production and operations and quality teams, which is something we really wanted to focus on this result here. So, the objective was really trying to understand um, how operational ready are these folks, and understand their best practices, and really kind of the overall health of the process through consistency of success here. In other words, did the project teams meet the business objective of the project or not?
Gotcha.
I'm going to stop sharing here. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I did not give you a proper long introduction. I always like to dive right into the conversation, but I do want viewers to know that you spent over 35 years with Anheuser-Busch in various engineering and management positions. So you come at this report with considerable insight into CapEx projects. So I'm curious to know if there were any surprises for you that you found within the research.
Actually, there were a couple of surprises and then a couple of things that we somewhat predicted. Let me share another slide with you here. All right, so you can see this figure 1.1, and this is out of our Horizons report. Probably the single biggest surprise that we saw when we got these responses was the top line, which is we'd asked the question to the owners, said, when do you start this operational readiness discussion? And what I really expected to see was discussions that occurred later in the project funding and project execution cycle. What we saw here is that 51% of them, half of them, are talking about operational readiness as part of the scoping and capital approval cycle. And that's, of course, where we think it should be, because it allows you to plan for everything from the ramp up volumes to the training methodologies to even some of the staffing requirements that typically have to get funded by a project to allow for all of these things to occur. What we didn't get too surprised with was kind of the rest of it, and that is a lot of folks are 28% are looking at this and starting to look at it at the design phase, and then of course it gets smaller as you get closer to the end of construction and checkout and turnover. Certainly we were happy to see that this was the approach that we took, and what we also found is that this did not so much matter as much on project size. However, as projects got smaller, we typically would see that some of this would be done later in the cycle rather than early in the cycle there.
Hmm.
So when we take a look at our data, we can see that we have a pretty wide distribution of spend on some of our projects, and kind of in my history and in looking at the survey results, what we found was really not surprising if you look at the amount of capex spend on a typical job. So half the projects were less than $500,000. I know in my personal experience that number was even greater than that.
Hmm.
Most of the projects that are executed are small projects, they're operational improvements, are there some innovation jobs and things like that. And then you can kind of see the distribution of projects as you go from kind of 19% are 10 million and less, and then of course as you get bigger, very few projects get executed at over $100 million, and that is pretty typical to what we're seeing both with the clients that we're working with here at CRB and with my experience with Anheuser-Busch. And if you take a look at the types of projects that are in the capital plan, we can see most of them, 73% of them, are process system improvements. And again, that's very consistent with what we expected to see there. Some are packaging improvements, automation and controls. And then if you kind of shift over to the right-hand side, we can really see the CapEx spending today compared to 2 years ago. Part of this is just driven by the fact that things cost more than they did 2 years ago. But it was interesting to understand the statistic that 41% of the companies are spending more on operational improvements than they did 2 years ago. And then the other thing that was a little bit surprising to us was the payback period. Companies are getting more aggressive at the payback requirements to fund a project. And so if you just take a look at the 2.5 years and less, that's roughly 60% of the projects that are 2.5 years or less. And that's not surprising. So part of why we think this operational readiness component is so critical is if for whatever reason you take a project, let's say a 2 year payback, and suddenly it takes 2.5 years to get it installed because of operational readiness issues there, that seriously has an impact on the overall ROI of a project.
Okay, that makes sense. And with the experience that you have in the industry, and also I know that the experience on the CRB team in general is very wide and deep. I would imagine that not a lot would come as a surprise. So I'm sure there's a lot in the report that isn't necessarily a surprise to you guys, but maybe the companies that you're serving might still not have this awareness, might not understand. I mean, it is good to see that the 51% do understand how early they need to be talking about operational readiness. But I would imagine there's a lot of education that goes on in terms of that operational readiness. Are there other things that you really want to focus on that you're concerned about too many companies are falling prey to
Yeah,
various traps?
Yeah, and let me share another slide here. One of the things that was interesting about the data is the last slide that we just looked at said half the companies are looking at operational readiness and they're considering that as part of their funding process. But what we're finding is that the results aren't there. So if you take a look at the red dashed box here, you can see that a majority of the projects, 2/3 of the respondents, they don't hit their startup targets at all.
Hmm.
Um, and only 3% report regularly hitting their startup targets as a saleable product dates and ramp up volumes. And and so we were intrigued by the fact that there are so many companies that are spending time looking at that, but they're really, quite frankly, not getting the results for that. Now, the other part of this is really kind of what is some of the challenges that are there, from a schedule perspective, and when we queried that, we saw a lot of this was really around timeline constraints. And well, let's be clear, speed to market is part of our industry here. And so the fact that the light blue bar, which is somewhat and very challenging in this survey result, that we had timeline constraints and hiring the right people and securing the funding are the highest level ones. That really did not come as a surprise for us.
You talked earlier. I'm going to jump back to something you said a little bit earlier about the four M's, and I may have misrepresented them here, but your report notes that a strong operational readiness strategy requires attention to workforce, equipment, upstream supply chain, and your processes, which I think is your four M's, right?
That
Machine.
is the four M's. Yes, that's
Okay.
exactly right.
Mine's
Said
machine.
more eloquently. Yes.
Well, at least more literally. I guess my question is, for our listeners, can you explain why some of these elements are important individually and in aggregate? Because obviously you can be strong on one or two, but if you need to be strong on all four, I imagine, in
You
order
know,
to hit these targets.
Yes, and this is probably the main takeaway of the entire operational readiness component. Operational readiness is really common sense, but it isn't common practice. And what we see teams doing oftentimes is they focus on the machine component, really the
Mhm.
equipment component of those four M's. Okay, and we hire procurement teams and engineers to specify equipment, and we have very detailed operational parameters, and we have FATs and site acceptance tests, and we have engineers that design the equipment and the buildings that go around it, and we really focus on equipment. And quite
Mhm.
frankly, most of the time that's a fairly predictable component of the project. Obviously, we can run into some delivery issues and things like that, but generally, we find that the owners are pretty good at specifying equipment, buying equipment, and getting it installed. Um,
Okay.
but the part that we find that really moves the needle around operational readiness is what happens if you install the perfect piece of equipment and you don't have trained operators, you don't have spare
Right.
parts on the shelf,
Right.
you don't have good material coming in that's within specification, and you don't have good processes that are in place, such as, hey, what happens when the machine does this? What is my reaction plan when I am when this particular thing happens? And so what we really want folks to focus on, what we really think helps them, is really focusing on that workforce, so the human side of things, really focusing on the materials that are coming in, and really
Mhm.
focusing on the methods. And at the end of the day, if we can focus on those things, what we kind of have when we're ready to press that big green button for startup is we have a workforce that is trained. We have operation and maintenance teams that have all the manuals and all the SOPs and reaction plans and preventive maintenance plans that are in place. We have materials and ingredients that are available and they're at the specified quality. We have spare parts on the shelf when we're ready
Right.
to start the lineup. And of course, then we go through a very structured equipment commissioning process to make sure we're testing for quality and those types of things. And when we combine the the capability of the equipment with all of those other factors, the the human side, the material side, and
Mhm.
really around the processes side, it really allows us to really have a complete startup, and that's where we see the greatest success with our clients.
When you talk about people focusing on equipment, I wonder if part of that is because the equipment it's a little, compared to the others, a little more controllable, right? I mean, supply chain, workforce, these are things, there's a lot of variables, external variables that people don't always have control over. So why not control the equipment? So I'm curious, do certain sectors struggle more with some of these elements, or is there sort of a universal pain point like workforce or supply
You know,
chain?
we did not see that different sectors have this figured out and other sectors do not.
Interesting.
This seems to be an equal pain point, whether you're making laundry detergent or some food product. And it's primarily it's I think a lot of it has to do with the time constraints that are on the project. A lot of
Yeah,
it has to do with the resource constraints that are assigned to projects. And quite frankly, that's part of the dialogue that really needs to occur in that pre-funding of the project. How do we want to primarily budget that? Plant budgets get tighter and tighter every year. So when
sure.
you add up a project onto the plant and you say, hey, look, I need to take 25% of your quality team and I need to make sure that they write all the specifications for this new product we're putting in place. They don't have the time. They have a full-time day job. So what we see is it doesn't matter what industry that is in. Having that discussion early and really talking about how do we want to try to do that is really going to help enable success there.
Cool.
Right. So you touched on this already, particularly when you were showing the slide of the 3% of companies that actually make their product launch deadlines consistently. Um, and the ramifications of that, you mentioned about the ROI in particular. If you're counting on a 2-year ROI that turns into 2.5, what other sorts of ramifications are there for missing those deadlines? Can you kind of paint a picture of the various consequences that get involved?
Yes, we can. Let me share another slide here. Okay, so what are some of the what's getting in the way of really of operational readiness there? And so part of it is again, this is the survey results that we had. So we have production barriers, and these are the top three production barriers you can see over to the left. 44% was labor availability and skilled workforce, and again, that permeates across all industries there. 39% was aging technology and obsolescence on the equipment, and 36% was really inefficiencies or bottlenecks to that. So obviously addressing that as we're scoping out projects and trying to figure out how we're going to train our workforce, et cetera, it's going to help mitigate that. And some of the roadblocks to improvement really are 53% insufficient budget. You can see half the time there's not enough
Mm.
time, and gosh, in my experience, it almost seems like every time there's not enough time, and
Always
uh,
time on me.
and and really lack of defined strategy and roadmap. So all of these things kind of all end up having an impact to your startup dates and your ramp up volume. And
Mm.
let me kind of show another slide here that kind of talks a little bit about the survey results. And I was kind of happy to see some of this, but perhaps the answer is it's not enough.
Mm.
We asked the question around what percentage of your total project budget do you allocate for operational readiness and kind of average over the last 3 years? I was actually pretty surprised and happy to see that it's anywhere from 1 to 4% that people are allocating to operational readiness. That's actually good to see. The I guess the concern is that enough given some of the results that we're seeing there. Um, so because all of this is going to drive, kind of answer your question, Aaron, it's going to drive speed to market. Okay. And and volume, speed to market, in service dates, and volume certainty really, for especially for innovation type projects, are really important for us to make sure that we are achieving the goals that we want to try to achieve. So we think that that is a major component of what we need to try to do to make sure the project is successful there.
Right, because of course the flip side, it's okay, missed deadlines bad, but made deadlines, that's good. So there's a lot to be gained by being able to get to the market faster. Can you talk more there too about the kinds of gains you're seeing from leaders in this area?
Yeah, so what I have seen in my own personal experience and what I think is pretty universal. Obviously, speed to market, particularly for innovation type projects, is something that we want to try to. I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. It's something we want to try to be consistent with. Okay, um, the if we have an innovation job, an innovation product that we're trying to bring to the market, and we know we're going to be the first ones out there, we kind of set the benchmark for all of the competitors to try to chase, and that's, I think, fairly universal regardless of the industry that you were in there. So when we can um, meet these deadlines and meet these in-service dates, really, and do that consistently, what we typically see is a level of confidence that the capital that we're being allocated is going to be well utilized, especially in companies that are capital constrained. And every company wants to have more capex than what they're allowed to spend. And if the projects can meet the targets, what we expect to see is meeting these targets consistently is going to enable them to invest with a greater degree of certainty, and probably also with a greater degree of efficiency that takes that same capital plan, and instead of doing 100 jobs, maybe we're doing 103 jobs. So we really think that um, you know the ramifications of doing this properly have all net positive implications here.
Okay.
And then one of the things that stood out in one of the statistics you showed earlier was labor workforce. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about the importance of training and workforce manufacturing personnel
Sure.
prior to this and when it begins?
Let me share a couple of slides that kind of explain some of the survey results for that.
Did that? I mean, I'm also curious if that came up as a major point before or after the report survey went out.
It has been training has been a major point.
Hmm.
Probably trying to figure out how to train is something that I think all manufacturers are really trying to figure out. We know that the workforce, that the traditional methods of training, where you sit in the classroom all day and the OEM is in there kind of going through his manual, we do see, as you can see on the third line there, at 53% OEM provided training is something that is still done, but not as effective as what we have seen from on the job training and written manuals and written materials and that type of thing. What we believe we're seeing around an industry trend that makes us more effective is really a lot of the short format training. So think of a TikTok video. Okay, how many
Mhm.
times do we go online and we say, "Hey, I need to change something or replace something," and I'll look at online. I'll look at a 5-minute video and I'll go out and I'll do that. We believe that that's something. I know it was something I was implementing for some time, and we believe that that type of format is becoming more and more effective. But um, you can see here, 89% on the job training. What we believe we're seeing with that is usually on the job training occurs while you are in checkout and startup mode and in ramp up mode. And quite frankly, in a perfect world, that's too late. You'd like to have the operator come well trained, so that when it comes time to do the ramp up, that they have all the training you could practically
Sure.
give them. The answer is that's just not a simple thing to do. But as you can see from the survey respondents, that 89% of them still believe that that is the most effective way to train. Now, let me go to the next slide here. And it's kind of really what are some of the production barriers. We kind of talked about this a little bit.
Yeah.
44% was really having availability, and then aging equipment. But how effective is the training here? And you could see here that most people are saying it's either neutral, if not effective, nor ineffective, or it is somewhat effective. So 60% are saying that they believe that they have somewhat effective or very effective training methods. That's a good thing.
Hmm.
Obviously, we want to try to bump that up a little bit. And interestingly, some folks, and let me jump to the next slide here, would even say that their training is completely ineffective. So when we look at kind of the skill gaps, we asked a question around what skill gaps do they encounter when hiring for new production. Um, you can see here that half the respondents said process troubleshooting is a major skill gap. And what we have seen specifically with that is with electrical technicians. Equipment's getting much more complex, and finding those electrical technicians that are really good at doing that. You obviously, there's going to have to be a great financial incentive for them to stick around, because otherwise they'll find something else to do. Um, but the other part is really kind of an equipment operation, maintenance, and repair. So again, equipment is getting more complex. As it becomes more flexible, it becomes more difficult to adjust, and the time that the teams are allowed to work on the equipment shrinks year over year. And of course, the equipment gets a year older, and every year the equipment's expected to run better than the year before. So really having the right troubleshooting, the maintenance and repair techs, and operators are really kind of the secret sauce we're seeing to helping them get to those goals there.
Okay, and I would love to really dive deeper on this. Actually, I feel like your slides here are just popping so many more questions into my head. Just thinking about that, what was it, 89% of on-the-job training, and how that compares with 51% seeing a gap in process troubleshooting. I have to wonder how effective that on-the-job training actually is if people can't really troubleshoot because they haven't run across that particular trouble yet.
And
Hmm.
and that's a good point, Aaron. What we have typically seen is it takes an entire year, it takes an entire calendar year for the line to reach full maturity. Um, and what we in our horizons report, we kind of called something the dip. Okay, and the dip for us is you, in the course of a project, you're executing the project, you're doing your construction, you're doing your checkout and startup, and then you start production. And in this time, you have a lot of the vendor reps that are there on site, and then at some point you're going to try to do some type of site acceptance test, and you're going to validate, did the equipment meet the specified quality and throughput requirements, etc. And then everybody goes home. All the vendor reps go home, and then that is the beginning of what we call the dip.
Hmm.
Okay, all those experts are there, um, all those people who are there to help you troubleshoot some nuance of the equipment is gone. And of course, now you're kind of trying to do this on your own. It's the magnitude and the duration of that dip, which is really where you make or break your production volumes and really help make the project successful, both commercially and financially. And again, the focusing on those four M's, man, machine, material, method type of an approach, we have seen has really minimized the the depth and the duration of that dip. It happens on every project. It happens on the best projects with the best teams. It's just how quickly can you recover? Typically, again, we have seen that this takes really fully 12 months to really get as good as those vendor reps that were there. And then at some point, then you actually get better than the vendor reps because you've seen more repetition of what's going on with the equipment. So it's a real challenge there, and a lot of it has to do with the training. On the job training, again, I think is beneficial. Obviously, the survey results would say that it's effective, but it really doesn't completely replace the daily routine and daily operation and the experience.
Okay. So I know we could dive deeper on a lot of these topics. We've kind of hit the highlights of what we saw as interesting points of the report. Are there any other things from this Horizons report that you'd really like to make sure we touch on?
The one thing that we didn't really talk about too much yet is really the commissioning process.
Hmm.
And again, predictably, we can usually get equipment, install equipment, and get it ready for checkout and commissioning and get through startup. What we have found is the teams that really develop a detailed commissioning plan, to really help guide them through that process, including, as simple as this sounds, just simple checklists that say, hey, did I put oil in the gearboxes? Did I lubricate all the bearings like I'm supposed to? Having these checklists and having this structured process, we have found really that predictably would improve results. Now, it sounds simple, and quite frankly, it is simple. We don't see that there's anything real complex about this, but it's really executing the fundamentals. And sometimes what we see is missing a target in service date may be beneficial if it allows more checkout and commissioning time, more calibration time, and it may have a positive net impact to the overall volume and the overall ROI. So sometimes we think that it's appropriate to miss an in service date. It can't be by an extended period of time, but it can certainly, as the team would view this, can I take an extra 2 or 3 days to get this thing dialed in, and then I'm going to come out the gate stronger there. So we have some survey information and some information in the Horizons report that kind of identifies some of that.
Okay.
Excellent. So I can think of one other thing that maybe this, you tell me this is unfair, Ken, but before we wrap up, do you have a slide, or can you sum up some of the best practices that CRB recommends for achieving operational readiness in your 80-page report?
It's I don't have a slide, but really what I want to iterate is that nothing here is complex. Um, Getting operational readiness, achieving operational readiness is really all around executing fundamentals. It's engaging the plant team,
Mhm.
which really kind of seems common sense. You have to engage the maintenance staff. You have to invest in interject the folks from the storeroom to make sure the spare parts are on the shelf. You want the QA folks there. You
Mhm.
want to make sure that the entire plant team is engaged, besides just the engineers buying equipment and installing equipment and hiring contractors. And and as we see teams doing this, it becomes the culture of how you do a project within the company, and then things just start getting more predictable and with better results.
Know your stakeholders. Yeah.
Or the stakeholders. So now we included a simple tool that is part of the Horizons report, that has been used in the past to kind of help track some of these things. And when you look at the tool, you look at it and go, well, of course, everybody should be doing that. And but the fact is that by tracking the progress, whether it's the progress of doing something as simple as, did I receive a good spare parts list from my vendor? Okay. And then I have to go through the spare parts list and I have to see, maybe I already have the spare part on the shelf and I just need to adjust my min maxes, or maybe this is a brand new part, or maybe I really don't need this part because I think I know the predictability of the failure rate. So some of these checklists and some of these routines, and again, this tool that's in the report can really, I think, help people start taking the step in the right direction to get operational ready.
This report's a free download on your site,
It is. It
right?
is a
Yeah.
free
So
download.
be sure to
Absolutely.
include that link in some of our follow up.
We will certainly do that.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. I really appreciate your insight, Ken. It's all very interesting stuff. And thank you for that. And thank you to our viewers for joining us today on Manufacturing Matters. If you have any questions for Ken, you can put them down in the comments below, on YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever you're watching this. And keep in mind that you can see past episodes of Manufacturing Matters also at our website, which is manufacturing-matters.com. And in the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe and all that friendly stuff that you can do for us. So thank you all again. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Ken.
You're welcome.